August 8, 1973, Houston Heights, Texas. A single gunshot shatters the morning silence. Inside a small house on Lamar Drive lies the body of Dean Corll, a respected businessman, former military serviceman, and pillar of the community. But his death would expose something far more sinister. Suspect is down, requesting additional units. Multiple juveniles on scene. The shooter wasn't a stranger. It was 17-year-old Elmer Wayne Henley, someone Corll had trusted. What followed would be one of the most shocking confessions in criminal history. You need to know what Dean did, what we did. There are bodies, a lot of bodies. The discovery would shake Texas to its core. Dean Corll, known to local children as the Candyman, had been hunting Houston's youth for years. But he didn't act alone. The story of Dean Corll begins in 1939. Born into a family of candy makers, young Dean learned early how to win people's trust. His mother's candy company would become his hunting ground. Children knew him as the man who gave away free candy. Parents saw him as a successful businessman. No one saw the monster beneath the surface. By 1972, Corll had perfected his method, but he needed help. That's when he met David Brooks, a troubled 15-year-old boy from a broken home. Brooks would become his first accomplice, lured in with money, gifts, and the attention he desperately craved. Soon after Brooks, Corll found Elmer Wayne Henley, another teenager seeking a father figure. What started as friendship would evolve into something far more sinister. These two teenagers would help Corll create a killing machine that would operate undetected for years. The pattern was simple but devastating. Brooks and Henley would lure other teenagers to Corll's house, usually with promises of a party or drugs. Once inside, the victims would face unimaginable horror. A custom-made torture board, handcuffs, and implements of torture awaited them. For 28 young men and boys, what began as a simple invitation would end in death. Corll's house on Lamar Drive became a chamber of horrors. His methods were calculating, his violence escalating with each victim. The victims followed a pattern. Young males, usually teenagers, often from broken homes. Boys who wouldn't be missed immediately. Brooks and Henley knew exactly who to target, earning up to $200 for each victim they brought to Corll. The Heights neighborhood of Houston was perfect hunting ground. Working-class families, busy parents, kids with freedom to roam. When teenagers disappeared, police often dismissed them as runaways. No one suspected the friendly Candyman. But on August 8, 1973, everything changed. Henley had brought his friend Rhonda Williams to Corll's house, along with Tim Curley. But this time, Corll's plan backfired. When he attacked Henley for bringing a girl, his young accomplice finally snapped. In the early hours of that August morning, Corll had forced all three teenagers to the floor at gunpoint. But something was different this time. For the first time, Henley saw Corll's rage directed at him. As Corll began handcuffing Tim Curley, he screamed at Henley for bringing a girl into his house. "I'm gonna kill you all," Corll shouted, his mask of control finally slipping. But Henley had access to another gun in the room, one Corll had trusted him with many times before. What happened next would later be captured in Henley's recorded confession.
Mama, baby.
Mama,
Huh?
I killed Dean.
Wayne?
Ma'am?
"Dean, you've gone far enough. I can't take it anymore." 6 shots rang out. Dean Corll, the Candyman, fell dead on his own living room floor. The following hours would reveal the true scope of horror. Now in police custody, began to talk. His confession would lead police to a boat shed in southwest Houston, Texas, where the first bodies were found. The boat shed excavation revealed the first 17 bodies. Young boys, buried in plastic or wrapped in bags, stacked on top of each other. Many still wore the swimsuits they disappeared in. Some had been missing for years. The excavation process would take days. Each body recovered told its own horror story. Detective David Mulliken later described the scene. The deeper we dug, the more we found. Some victims had been there so long, their remains had become entangled. But the boat shed was just the beginning. Henley's recorded confession led investigators to more locations. A property in High Island, a beach. Each site revealed more victims. The body count kept rising as Henley's tape recordings filled hours of police interviews. The full methodology of the killings emerged. Corll had a ritual. After his accomplices lured victims to his house, he would offer them drugs or alcohol. Then the torture would begin. The torture board became Corll's signature, a plywood device, 4.5 feet long, with handcuffs at each corner. He had built it himself, carefully planning every detail. Some victims would remain alive for days. David Brooks, Corll's first accomplice, initially denied knowledge of the murders. But faced with Henley's confessions, he too began to talk. His testimony would reveal how Corll had manipulated them both from the beginning. Brooks described his first encounter with Corll's violence. "I walked in and saw him with a boy on the board. He said if I told anyone, he'd kill my whole family. After that, he started paying me to bring him more boys." The Heights community was devastated. Parents who had long accepted police explanations of runaway teenagers now faced an unbearable truth. Their children hadn't run away. They had been taken. Most shocking was how Corll had maintained his public image. Former employees of the candy company remembered him as quiet, polite, and always willing to give free candy to children. He had served in the military, held a steady job, owned his own home. The recorded confessions revealed how Corll chose his victims. He targeted boys from broken homes, teenagers who hitchhiked, kids who hung around the candy factory. His accomplices, Brooks and Henley, knew these boys. They had gone to school with them. Sometimes they even lured their own friends. One of the most disturbing aspects was the timing. While parents searched desperately for their missing sons, Corll would often be attending neighborhood gatherings. He would offer sympathy to grieving mothers, knowing their children were buried beneath his boat shed floor. The investigation revealed something else, a systemic failure by law enforcement. Between 1970 and 1973, dozens of teenage boys had vanished from the Heights. Police had dismissed most cases as runaways, despite parents insisting their children wouldn't leave voluntarily. The trials began in 1974. Elmer Wayne Henley, now 18, faced 6 counts of murder. The courthouse was packed daily as Houston confronted its darkest chapter. During the trial, the audio tapes became crucial evidence. Hour after hour, Henley's voice detailed the murders. His emotionless descriptions chilled the courtroom. Even veteran prosecutors struggled to maintain composure. One recording captured Henley explaining his role. "I helped him. I did everything he asked. I want people to know what really happened." His words echoed through the silent courtroom as victims' families wept. David Brooks's trial followed. Unlike Henley, Brooks showed no remorse. He maintained he was merely a witness, despite evidence proving his active participation. The jury didn't believe him. The sentences were handed down. Henley received 6 consecutive 99-year terms. Brooks got 1 life sentence. But for many families, justice felt incomplete. Corll's death had denied them closure. The impact on Houston was profound. The Heights neighborhood, once known for its small-town atmosphere, changed forever. Parents no longer let their children walk alone. The candy factory shut down. Trust was shattered. The Candyman case would change criminal investigation forever. Before Corll, serial killers were not widely understood. The term itself wasn't even in common use. But the discovery of 28 victims forced law enforcement to confront a new kind of evil. The recorded confessions became a valuable tool for training new investigators. They revealed how predators could manipulate not just victims, but young accomplices. How they could hide in plain sight, respected by their communities. Perhaps most importantly, the case changed how police handled missing persons reports. No longer could teenagers be dismissed as runaways, without thorough investigation. Every disappearance had to be taken seriously. Today, the recordings remain in police archives. Henley's confessions, his desperate attempt to explain the unexplainable, still haunt those who hear them. The tapes serve as a chilling reminder of how evil can hide behind the most ordinary facade. Elmer Wayne Henley remains in prison, his parole repeatedly denied. David Brooks died in prison in 2020, never having expressed remorse. As for Dean Corll, his house was demolished, the candy factory torn down. But the scars remain. In the Heights neighborhood today, few speak of the Candyman. But old-timers still remember that terrible summer of 1973, when the friendly Candyman's true nature was revealed. When Houston learned that sometimes the monsters are hiding in plain sight. 50 years have passed since the Candyman's reign of terror ended, but the case continues to haunt those who remember. 28 young lives lost, countless families shattered, and a community forever changed. The recovered audio tapes remain sealed in evidence, their contents too disturbing for public release. But they serve as crucial teaching tools, helping new generations of investigators recognize the warning signs they missed in 1973. Some questions may never be answered. How many more victims remain undiscovered? How did so many boys vanish without raising serious alarm? And perhaps most haunting, how did a candy maker become one of America's most prolific killers? The Corll Candy Company building is long gone now, replaced by modern development. But for those who lived through that summer, every piece of candy carries the bitter taste of a dark memory. A reminder that evil often wears the sweetest disguise. For the families of Dean Corll's victims, time hasn't dimmed their loss. Each year they gather to remember the boys who never came home. Their stories serve as a warning that still echoes through the Heights. Sometimes the real monsters aren't hiding under the bed. Sometimes they're handing out candy right next door